The man in the security cameras. Mike was a night shift security guard in a quiet office building. Most nights were uneventful until he noticed movement on the East Wing camera. A man in a black suit walking down the hallway. The building was supposed to be empty. Grabbing his flashlight, Mike went to check, but the hallway was empty. When he reviewed the footage, the man simply vanished into a wall. Shaken, he told himself it was a glitch. The next night at 3 a.m. the man appeared again. This time he stopped and looked directly into the camera. His face was pale and unnervingly blank, yet his eyes seemed to pierce the screen. Mike switched cameras, but the man was gone. On the third night the monitors flickered, then all went black except one. The man stood still in the East Wing staring. Mike's phone wouldn't connect, and the air around him felt cold and heavy. The cameras began switching on, showing the man in different parts of the building. One feed showed him outside the security room door. Terrified, Mike turned, but the hallway was empty. When he looked back at the monitors, the man was behind him on the screen, grinning. Mike fled the building and never came back. 2. The forever 3 a.m. shift. Raleen hated the night shift at the diner, especially the customer who came every night at 3 a.m. The man in a black trench coat always sat at the same booth and ordered black coffee. He never spoke or looked at her, just stared out the window. One night, curiosity got the better of her. "You're always here at the same time." "Why?" she asked as she placed his coffee down. The man didn't answer. Frustrated, she walked away, but when she turned back, the booth was empty. And so was the coffee cup she just poured. Confused, Darlene checked the doors. They were locked, as always, during her shift. She shrugged it off, but the next night, she decided to close early. At 2:59 a.m., the bell over the door jingled. Her blood ran cold. The man sat in his usual booth, staring out the window. "I locked the door," she whispered. Terrified, she grabbed her phone to call the manager, but the line was dead. When she turned back to the booth, the man was gone. In his place was a napkin with a message scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Don't make me wait tomorrow." 3. The factory that doesn't sleep. Lewis worked as a night janitor in an old, abandoned factory. His shift was usually quiet until the machines started turning on by themselves. A conveyor belt humming or a light flickering. But one night he saw movement. Through the shadows he spotted workers, dozens of them, operating the machines. Their movements were stiff and unnatural, like puppets on strings. Lewis called out, but they didn't respond. When he moved closer, his heart stopped. Their faces were featureless, smooth, pale skin where eyes, noses, and mouths should have been. One figure turned toward him, and its blank face twisted to resemble his. Panicked, Lewis ran toward the exit, but the factory doors were locked. Cold hands grabbed him from behind, dragging him toward the assembly line. His screams were drowned out by the sound of grinding machinery. The next morning, the factory owner arrived to find the janitor's cart abandoned. On the security footage, Lewis was nowhere to be seen, except among the faceless figures, operating the machines in silence. 4. The haunted morgue. Maria worked alone at the morgue, processing bodies for the night shift. It was routine work, until one night when she noticed a drawer open that she had just closed. Confused, she shut it firmly. Minutes later, it slid open again. The body inside, a man who had died in a car accident, now had his eyes open. Maria froze, staring. But when she blinked, the eyes were closed again. She tried to shake it off, blaming exhaustion. But then she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Turning quickly, she found no one there. The lights flickered, and she felt a cold breath on her neck. Terrified, Maria checked the logbook. Her blood ran cold. The dead man's name matched her own last name. Before she could react, the lights went out, and a whisper echoed in her ear. "You're next." 5. Delivery to nowhere. Eric was a food delivery driver working late shifts. One night, he got an order to a cabin deep in the woods. The location wasn't even on his GPS, but he followed the directions until he found the decrepit cabin. In her porch, light flickered as he approached. A note on the door read, "Come inside, leave the food on the table." Against his better judgment, Eric stepped in. The air was cold and smelled of decay. On the table, a feast was set, but the food was rotting and covered in flies. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. Eric spun around, but no one was there. The only sound was faint whispering from the shadows. He turned toward the window, but outside his car was gone. In its place stood a figure, a man with Eric's face, but with hollow black eyes. 6. The graveyard call center. Rebecca thought her new night shift at a call center would be boring, but her first call changed everything. The customer on the other end asked for help canceling their service. Rebecca entered their information and froze. The account had been inactive for 15 years. "Sorry, but this account was closed a long time ago," she said, trying to stay professional. The voice on the other end, raspy and distant, replied, "I know, but I'm still waiting for my refund." Shaken, Rebecca put the caller on hold and checked the logs. The name on the account belonged to someone who had died years ago. She turned back to the phone, but the line was silent. The next night, Rebecca got another call from the same number. This time, the voice whispered her name over and over until the line cut out. When she checked the call logs, no incoming call had been recorded. By the third night, the calls came every hour. On the final call, the voice said, "Come see me." Rebecca quit her job, but she swore she could still hear the phone ringing at home, always at midnight. 7. The gas station phantom. Jake worked the graveyard shift at a lonely gas station on a deserted highway. Most nights he served truckers or the occasional lost traveler. But one night, at 2:00 a.m., a pale woman in a tattered dress walked in. She didn't speak or look at Jake. She placed a few coins on the counter, grabbed a pack of gum, and left. Jake didn't think much of it until he realized the coins were old, dated 1943. The woman returned the next night exactly at the same time. This time, Jake asked her if she was okay. She looked at him for the first time, her hollow eyes full of sadness. "I'm waiting for him," she whispered before vanishing into the night. Curious, Jake asked a co-worker about the woman. They explained that a young bride had died in a car accident near the gas station decades ago and was said to haunt the area. The next night, Jake saw her again, but this time she wasn't alone. A shadowy figure stood outside, its hand reaching for hers. When Jake blinked, they were both gone, and the coins on the counter had turned to dust. 8. The library's last reader. Lisa loved working the night shift at the university library. It was peaceful, with only the sound of her footsteps echoing through the aisles. But one night, she noticed someone sitting at a corner table. A man hunched over a book. She approached him to let him know the library was closing soon. As she got closer, she noticed something strange. The man's hands were skeletal, and the book's pages were blank. He looked up, revealing a hollow face with glowing eyes. "I'm not finished yet," he said in a low, rasping voice. Lisa stumbled back, terrified, but when she turned on the lights, the man was gone. The next day, Lisa told her manager, who shrugged it off. But later that night, the man appeared again, reading the same blank book. This time, the words "leave now" were scrawled across the pages in dripping red ink. Lisa didn't wait to find out what would happen next. She left the library and never returned. The next morning, her co-workers found the book on the table, its pages filled with Lisa's name. 9. The elevator that never stops. Dan worked the night shift at a luxury hotel, mostly helping guests or answering phones. One night, he got a call from the 14th floor. When he arrived, the hallway was empty, and none of the rooms were occupied. Confused, Dan stepped into the elevator to head back to the lobby. But instead of going down, the elevator went up, higher than the building's top floor. The numbers on the display climbed to 50, then 100. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened to a dark, endless void. A faint whisper echoed from the darkness. "Step forward, Dan." Panicked, he hit every button, but the elevator wouldn't close. Suddenly, he felt cold fingers brushing his neck. Screaming, he jumped back, and the doors slammed shut. The elevator plummeted, stopping abruptly at the lobby. When Dan reported the incident, his manager paled. "There's no 14th floor call button," he said. Dan never worked another shift, but late-night guests often report hearing an elevator endlessly moving, with no one inside. 10. The silent convenience store customer. Paula worked the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store where her only company was the hum of fluorescent lights. One night at 3:00 a.m., a tall man entered wearing a black hoodie. He didn't say a word as he walked to the back, grabbed a carton of milk, and placed it on the counter. "Cash or card?" Paula asked, but the man remained silent, his head tilted downward. After a moment, he slowly reached into his pocket and handed her a crumpled bill. When she turned to get his change, she felt a chill run down her spine. When Paula turned back, the man was gone. Confused, she stepped outside, but the parking lot was empty. His milk was still on the counter. Shaking it off, she returned inside, only to see him standing at the back of the store again, holding the same carton. At this time, Paula didn't speak. She froze as he walked up to the counter, placed the milk down, and reached into his pocket again. But instead of cash, he pulled out a photograph of her sleeping in her bed. Paula's heart raced as the man tilted his head up, revealing hollow, blackened eyes. The lights in the store flickered, and the photograph disintegrated into ash. When the lights stabilized, the man was gone, and so was the milk. Paula quit the next morning, but every night since, she wakes up at 3:00 a.m. to find a carton of milk on her kitchen table, and the man's hollow eyes staring through her window. 11. The Warehouse of Whispers. David worked the graveyard shift at an abandoned warehouse, tasked with guarding what he assumed was empty space. Most nights it was just him and the hum of the security monitors. But one night he heard whispers echoing through the vast building. He grabbed his flashlight and began searching. The whispers grew louder as he reached the loading dock. There he found dozens of small, dusty footprints leading into the darkness. He followed them until his flashlight flickered and died. The whispers stopped, replaced by the sound of tiny footsteps scurrying toward him. Panicking, David ran back to his post and locked the door. But when he checked the monitors, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Dozens of small figures standing outside the security room. They were children, pale and expressionless, their eyes wide and unblinking. David tried calling his supervisor, but the phone only emitted static. When he turned back to the monitors, the children were gone. The next morning, David checked the warehouse records and found something chilling. The site had once been an orphanage that burned down decades ago. No children had survived. That night, he refused to go back. But as he walked to his car, he saw tiny footprints leading from the warehouse to his front door. 12. The Ghost on the Train. Sam worked as a night conductor for a commuter train that ran between cities. The last train of the night was always quiet, with only a handful of passengers. One evening, a young woman boarded at an unlisted station, her long black hair covering her face. Sam asked for her ticket, but she remained silent, clutching a battered suitcase. He let it go, but something about her unsettled him. When he checked the car again, she was gone. The train hadn't stopped, and her suitcase was still on the seat. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the suitcase. Inside was a collection of old photographs, all of people who looked terrified. In the corner of each photo, Sam noticed a shadowy figure standing in the background. Suddenly, the train's lights flickered, and the woman reappeared, standing at the far end of the car. This time her face was visible, twisted, burned, and eyeless. She raised a finger to point at him before disappearing again. Sam quit the next day, but he couldn't escape her. Every night he found a photograph on his pillow of himself standing on that train with the shadowy figure now behind him. 13. The Pharmacy's Midnight Customer. Carly worked at a 24-hour pharmacy where the night shift was usually uneventful. But one night, a woman in a blood-stained hospital gown walked in, her hair wet and matted. "Can I help you?" Carly asked nervously. The woman muttered something about needing medicine but didn't specify. Carly rang up a generic painkiller and handed it to her. As the woman reached out, Carly noticed her hands were ice cold. The woman left without paying, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind her. Confused, Carly went to clean them up, but found that the footprints stopped halfway across the floor. Later, she checked the security footage. The woman had walked in, but the cameras glitched as soon as she reached the counter. When they stabilized, Carly was standing there alone. The next night, the woman returned, placing the same box of painkillers on the counter. This time, Carly didn't speak, but the woman leaned in and whispered, "It still hurts." Carly ran to the back room, but when she returned, the box was gone and the floor was wet again. A week later, Carly learned that a woman matching the description had drowned in a nearby hospital 2 years earlier. 14. The haunted motel room. Brian worked as a night clerk at a remote motel off the highway. It was usually a quiet shift with few guests, but one night, a man with a scarred face checked into room 13, paying in cash. He seemed nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow. A few hours later, Brian noticed the room lights were flickering. Thinking it was a wiring issue, he decided to check it out. When he knocked on the door, there was no answer. He opened it cautiously and found the room empty, the bed neatly made, but the air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Walking back to the front desk, Brian checked the security footage. What he saw made his heart race. The man with the scarred face was sitting in the room, facing the door. His hands were clutching a photograph, Brian's own face staring back at him from the image. Suddenly, the footage glitched, and the man's face twisted into a horrifying grin. As Brian leaned closer to the screen, a voice whispered from behind him, "You're." Spinning around, Brian found no one there. But when he returned to the front desk, a new photograph had appeared. His own face, now with a deep gash across his forehead. Brian quit the next morning, but every night since, he hears the same whisper whenever he passes room 13. Next time, it's you. 15. The hospital's forgotten patient. Sarah worked as a nurse in the emergency room, pulling the night shift to cover for the understaffed hospital. One night, a patient was brought in. An elderly man with deep cuts all over his body. His skin was pale, his eyes wide open, but Sarah tried to stabilize him, but nothing worked. After hours of struggling, the man's heart monitor flatlined. She closed his eyes, and the doctors declared him dead. But something about the situation didn't sit right. As Sarah walked away, she heard a faint noise, a scratching sound, coming from the man's room. Thinking it was just a malfunction, she went to check. The room was dark, but when she flicked on the light, the man was sitting up in bed, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. "What's wrong with you?" Sarah whispered, terrified. His head snapped around, his eyes now glowing with an eerie light. His lips curled into a twisted smile, and in a low voice he muttered, "You'll never leave." Sarah tried to escape, but when she checked the room again, the man was gone. The door slammed shut behind her, and when she turned around, she found herself face to face with the corpse, now standing in the hallway. 16. The shadows in the office. Tom was the last one working in the office building, alone during the night shift. His job was simple: organize files, check emails, and keep an eye on the security footage. But the longer he stayed, the more he noticed something strange. The lights flickered off and on, and sometimes he heard faint footsteps echoing down the empty halls. At first, he assumed it was just the building settling, but the sounds grew louder and closer. One night, he decided to investigate. As he walked down the hall, the shadows on the walls began to move. At first it was subtle, flickers at the edge of his vision. But as he moved closer, the shadows seemed to stretch toward him, their forms taking shape. Suddenly, one of the shadows lunged at him, wrapping around his body like cold hands. Tom tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadowed figure whispered in his ear, "You're not alone anymore." Panicking, Tom stumbled back, but the shadows followed, closing in around him. When he turned to run, the lights went out completely, and the darkness consumed him. The next morning, his co-workers found the office eerily silent. Tom's desk was empty, but the shadowy figures could be seen in the corner of every security camera feed. 17. The night janitor's secret. Lewis had worked as the night janitor in a decrepit high school for years. The halls were empty, the classrooms dark. But every night as he mopped the floors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. One evening, he saw something in the reflection of the janitor's closet mirror. A figure standing behind him, wearing a black mask. Louise spun around, but the closet was empty. He chalked it up to his tired mind playing tricks. Later that night, as he cleaned the gymnasium, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find a shadowy figure standing at the entrance, slowly walking toward him. Lewis ran, but the figure followed, its footsteps echoing louder with each passing second. He burst into the hallway, only to find the hallways warped and unfamiliar. The lockers looked different, and the walls seemed to stretch forever. In the distance he saw the masked figure waiting for him, its empty eyes glowing in the dark. Lewis didn't survive that night. The next morning the school was empty. The janitor's closet was locked from the inside, and a note was found that read, "I'm still here. I'll be waiting." 18. The call that never ended. Amanda worked as a night receptionist at a small hotel on the outskirts of town. The guests were few, and most nights were spent answering calls that went nowhere. One night around 2:00 a.m., the phone rang, but when she picked it up, no one was there. She hung up, but it rang again. This time, Amanda could hear faint breathing on the other end, as if someone was waiting for her to speak. She repeated her greeting, but still no answer. The phone call continued for hours, with only heavy breathing and eerie whispers. After a few more attempts, Amanda decided to check the phone lines. As she walked toward the back room, the whispers grew louder, and the sound of a woman sobbing echoed through the hotel. Suddenly, the phone line cut, and the hotel went silent. Amanda returned to the front desk, but the lights flickered. The phone rang again. This time, a voice whispered, "I'm in room 13. Amanda ran to check the room. Inside, there was no one, but the bed was soaked in blood. The next morning, the police found no trace of Amanda, except for her name scrawled in the blood on the wall.